A scam on a mind-blowing scale that will dwarf that of the banking scandal of 2008 now looks increasingly likely to have been perpetrated on us by the very same people that brought us to the verge of ruin last time. If this turns out to be the case, the financial world will be totally blown apart and things will never be the same again. This podcast requires rather more effort on the part of the listener than my ongoing series about the Eurozone crisis. Depending on your familiarity with finance, you may need to sit down in a quiet place, concentrate hard, and probably listen to what follows more than once to fully understand it. Certainly this will be the case for people with only a rudimentary understanding of the subject. But it's vitally important, and if you can get your head around it, you should be able to see the world in a completely different way, and it will also help prevent you from being wiped out by a bunch of crooks in suits who somehow manage to never see the inside of a courtroom. Before I begin, I need to paint a brief picture of how we got to where we are today in a historically meaningful context. Goldsmiths of the 17th century naturally had to keep their precious gold and silver safe, so they typically had secure premises with fortified rooms and heavy lockable metal chests. Gold and silver were the only viable currencies of the day, and keeping them safe was always a headache. Private persons and merchants with large amounts of precious metals were particularly vulnerable to robbery, so they would approach their local goldsmiths and ask to store the gold for them in these secure vaults. When the physical metal was safely deposited, the goldsmith would issue the depositor with a receipt stating the amount of gold or silver he or she had deposited. Naturally, the goldsmith could charge some modest fee for this service, so he made a little extra money. The depositor, for his part, was able to sleep a lot better at night, knowing his capital was about as safe as it could be in those days. So for a simple example, let's say a merchant has deposited 5 ounces of gold with a goldsmith named Mr. X. The smith will keep these 5 ounces safely in his strong room. The merchant is handed a piece of paper stating that he has 5 ounces of gold on deposit with Mr. X, the goldsmith. When in due course he needs his gold back, he takes the ticket to the smith, and on production of it, the gold is returned to him. Simple so far, I would hope. Now, in the interest of keeping this background detail as concise as possible, I'm going to fast forward into the important points. As time went by, merchants got fed up going backwards and forwards to their smiths to get their gold, offering up their tickets, and if withdrawing less than they had on deposit, having to wait for another ticket to be drawn up by the smith. So what to do? Imagine that merchant A owes merchant B 5 ounces of gold for some corn or wheat or whatever he has purchased from him. Rather than go through the usual route, he simply signs the back of the receipt with the following instruction. Mr. X, please hand over my 5 ounces of gold to the bearer of this note. Now, a totally novel form of payment has spontaneously arisen. The implications of the last few sentences of this paragraph are huge. Think about it. We have gone from a primitive system for the safe deposit of inconvenient, heavy physical metal to a brand new system of paper money which is 100% backed by gold. Not only that, but it's transferable. Depending on the choice of wording on the ticket that the merchant has written, this piece of paper can be very, very versatile indeed. The instruction to the gold merchant in the above example makes gold payable to the bearer. In other words, simply whoever presents the note can collect the gold. The person presenting it could be anyone. It's strikingly similar to a modern banknote in this respect. On the other hand, if the merchant had written, Mr. X, please pay my gold to Mr. A, then the gold can only be released to the specified person, Mr. A, and to no one else. In this instance, it's functioning very much like a modern cheque. Now, there are all sorts of fancy forms of wording we can employ to massively increase the utility of this novel form of paper money, but they are way beyond the scope of this item. The key point to remember from the foregoing is that paper money has been created and can be transferred between subsequent parties. The underlying gold can simply remain where it is, safe in the original goldsmith's vault, whilst the paper that it relates to can be passed between any number of individuals, any of whom could, if they wished, simply return it to the original goldsmith and obtain 5 ounces of real physical gold metal. The foregoing developments lead us to quite an historic milestone in the history of money. Before this practice came into being, an individual had to transport his gold or silver by hand. He had to carry the coins or bars and transport them on foot or by coach across open country, where the risk of robbery was ever present. Writing in his famous diary in the 1660s, Samuel Pepys describes how he had to transport his gold from London to Brampton and the perilous nature of the journey. He goes on to describe having to bury the gold in the dead of night in the rear garden of his father's house, all the time fearful of the possibility he might be being observed. He lost several coins in the process while fumbling in the darkness. However, a few short years later, and the advent of the receipt system meant that he could achieve the same effect without ever removing his gold from safe custody. A receipt was every bit as valuable as the physical gold to which it related, and no more immune from theft. But it was just a slip of paper that could easily be sewn into the lining of a coat or otherwise concealed so readily as to be invisible, and therefore undiscoverable by the highwaymen who preyed on travellers in those far-off days. It was a huge step forward in security. Anyway, in that short period of time, we've crammed in quite a lot of key concepts. If you're a financial novice, but you've understood what I just said, give yourself a pat on the back. A subject like this needs to be broken down. So I'll begin again with the next pieces of the puzzle in part 2. Do try to follow all this if you possibly can. I'll be sharing with you an extraordinary story, and you will need enough background information to fully appreciate the magnitude of it.